When was the first time you met Muhammad Ali, Bob? Let's just jump right into that.
Would be in 1965.
Okay.
And I had met the great football player Jim Brown. And Brown said that I should be Ali's promoter and lawyer. I had never seen a boxing match, but I had handled a big case as a prosecutor in the U.S. Attorney's Office when we seized all the money in the Patterson-Liston fight.
The SDNY, right? That's what you were with the Southern
The
District?
famous Southern District,
yeah.
right. And so I met Ali and his advisor then, Herbert Muhammad, and Jim in a meeting, and they shipped me out to Chicago to get the blessing of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, and I got that blessing and scheduled a fight March of '66 with Ernie Terrell in Chicago, and Ali, while he was training in Miami, was reclassified from 1Y because at that point he was functionally illiterate, so he couldn't pass the test. And they made him 1A, and then Bob Halloran at CBS in Miami interviewed him, and that's when Ali said, I ain't going to Vietnam, I ain't going to fight the Viet Cong, they never used the N-word to me, I'm just not going. And Mayor Daley in Chicago, where the Terrell fight was going to be held, kicked us out. We couldn't find a venue any place in the United States. We ended up in Toronto, and that was my first fight in March of 1966. Ali and Chuvalo for the heavyweight championship.
Welcome to boxing.
Yeah.
That was your welcome to boxing.
No, but it was great because when people
Promoting.
come up to me and say, "Oh, this was a tough promotion that you've done," like a year ago or whatever, I said, a piece of cake compared to my first one.
It all kind of broke you in and made everything that much easier from there on out. For
Yeah,
the lack
it
of a better
did. It
phrase.
certainly did. And I wouldn't have stayed, except I was so angry what they were doing to Ali, who by that time I had really gotten close to, that I stayed around to fight everything and took him to England and then Germany. And then Judge Roy Hoffines, who owned the Astrodome, had us come back to the United States and fight a couple of fights there. And he then won Zora Foley in the Garden, and that was that. He was off for 3.5 years. They took his passport. Nobody would license him. I mean, horrible the way they treated him.
What was he like when he wasn't in front of a camera?
The greatest. I mean, terrific. Better when he wasn't in front of the camera. He was a warm, generous human being, highly intelligent. Although, again, when I met him, he was functionally illiterate. He learned how to read and write. But he was very, very astute and intelligent, but really nice, really nice. I'm not just saying this because he's no longer here, but he was a really nice person.
Well, I mean, because, again, we could spend hours talking about the people who you have promoted, fights that you've promoted, from George Foreman to obviously Manny Pacquiao and Marvelous Marvin Hagler and the names that just jump off the list, Sugar Ray and Tyson, and now Tyson Fury. You've done a couple of fights. You said you just got off the phone with him a couple of hours ago,
I've been
right?
promoting Tyson Fury for the last 4 fights, and he's a real character.
Oh,
I
no.
mean, he is larger than life, and not just because he's so tall. He's just a great entertainer and a great personality, and also a great guy. I mean, really, and I've really, with a guy like Tyson Fury, who comes from a very distinct background, he's from the Gypsy Nation, lived in Ireland and then in Northern England. The whole Gypsy culture is real. I don't want to go into it necessarily here, but is really, really interesting. And I've made it a point to spend time with him, talking about different things, not just boxing. And I've learned a lot, which I wasn't aware of the gypsy culture. So very interesting.
He was here a couple of years ago, Bob, and we were talking to him and everyone who came with him, and I didn't understand a word they were saying, to be very honest with you. It was he speaks so fast, and then he sat down here, and he was so remarkable in sharing his struggles with mental health and how he is so open about it and how it's important to hear him, that somebody who is such a hulking individual of a man who can break you in two, who gets off the mat, right, after he's been knocked down, talk about how he's struggling with what's in between his temples is so important, I think, for people to hear that story.
Right, and what
Bob.
he's told me is even when there's no fight on the horizon, and because of the pandemic, he went over a year between the second fight with Wilder and the third, he was able to keep his sanity by going into the gym twice a day to train, because he felt that training like that, even when there was no fight on the horizon, kept him mentally stable.
What's next for him?
Well, now we're very interesting. Anthony Joshua lost to Alexander Usyk, who's now has some of the belts, and we're trying to get, there's a rematch clause, Joshua to step aside so that Tyson can fight Usyk for all 4 belts. That would be a unified title. And they're talking about doing it in Saudi Arabia, which wants to stage that fight in March. Hopefully, it'll all come together. If it doesn't, if Joshua insists on the rematch with Usyk, then Fury will fight Dillian White, who's the #1 contender. And we do that fight as sort of a homecoming for Tyson in an arena in Manchester, where he comes from.
Bob Arum here on the Rich Eisen Show. What's the biggest fight that you weren't able to make in your career that you're like, you know what, there was so much mishigas, to use the word, that just you couldn't get it done, or you wanted to get it done and couldn't get done? Which one is that, Bob?
Ultimately, I got it done. I mean, the Pacquiao fight with Mayweather, that went on for 5 years with a lot of nonsense until we finally got it done, and it was the biggest, from a standpoint of money, the biggest fight ever when they finally fought. The fight that I haven't been able to get done is Terrence Crawford and Errol Spence, because, frankly, the two fighters want so much money, and while it is a great fight in the ring and hardcore boxing fans love it, it doesn't pencil out as far as pay-per-view, which is not as robust as it was 5 or 10 years ago.
When you say nonsense, what do you mean by nonsense? When you said the nonsense with Pacquiao and
well, when
Mayweather?
First there was drug testing, there was always an excuse why the fight couldn't happen. So meanwhile, Floyd went his way, Manny went his way. They each made a lot of money during that period, but we couldn't get them together. It took 5 years to get them together. But when we got them together, we did over 4 million pay-per-view homes and hundreds of millions of dollars. So maybe it was all worth it in the end.
Hey, you watched all the way to the end. Thanks for that. Watch more right here.